Chapter 12. The Chamber of the Heart. Septimus landed Spitfire on the broad space above the dragon house where Jenna had listened for the dragon's heartbeat. It wasn't until Spitfire touched the ground that Septimus realized that what he had thought was a cleared patch of snow was in fact black ice. Spitfire's feet disappeared from under him. He landed with a thud on his well-padded stomach and slid at great speed toward the battlements. A moment later the battlements were gone, sending an avalanche of stones thundering down to the cut. It was only Spitfire's talons digging into the ice, and a superb piece of tail breaking, that stopped Septimus and his dragon from following the stones into the cut below. A delighted face in an attic window watched the scene. "Grandma, Grandma, it's Spitfire! Grandma, look!" yelled the boy. His grandmother was less thrilled. "That tail could put all the windows out," she said. Septimus slipped down from the pilot dip and patted the dragon's nose. "Well done, Spitfire. Go home." But Spitfire didn't want to go home. He could see that there was another dragon right beneath his feet, and he wanted to meet it. He thumped his tail in disapproval. The little boy in the attic squealed with excitement. His grandmother threw open the window. "Careful!" she yelled. "Sorry!" Septimus shouted. He looked at his stubborn dragon, and a whisper of the synchronicity between him and Spitfire came back. Now he understood why Spitfire wanted to stay. Septimus put his hand to his ear, which was the sign that told Spitfire to listen. Spitfire dutifully dropped his head down so that Septimus could talk at dragon ear height. "Spitfire, the dragon is very ill. She may even be dying. If you stay, you must be very quiet. You must not move. No tail thumping, no claw scratching, no snorting, no anything. Do you understand?" Spitfire blinked twice in assent. Then he lay down on the ice and mournfully rested his head over the parapet. A dying dragon was a terrible thing. Septimus patted Spitfire's neck and left his dragon to be watched over by a nervous grandmother and her excited grandson. With Jenna's cry of "She's dead" still echoing in his head, Septimus raced down a narrow flight of stone steps that led to the opposite side of the cut. As he made his way along the foot of the wall toward the dragon house, a faint movement and a slight cooling of the air told Septimus that he was walking through a throng of ghosts, and from the restrained, somewhat regal atmosphere, he guessed they were ancient queens and princesses, anxiously watching. Septimus moved slowly through the ghosts toward the open mouth of the dragon house. He now saw what Spitfire's fire had revealed. It was eerily beautiful. The dragon boat, stark white against the deep blue lapis of the dragon house, lay deathly still, encased in a frosting of ice. A shaft of light from the winter sun glanced in and made the ice sparkle with such movement that for a moment Septimus thought that all was well and the dragon boat was breathing. But the concerned faces of Marcellus and Jenna, and even Janet Martin, on the opposite side of the cut, told him otherwise. Septimus walked quickly across what was left of the ice, reached the boatyard side of the cut, and followed Marcellus and Jenna into the chill of the dragon house. The air inside reminded Septimus of the ice tunnels, stale, strange, and icy cold. He made his way along the icy marble walkway and joined Jenna and Marcellus where they stood, looking down at the dragon boat's head. Her head rested on a rug laid on the marble walkway. The swan-like curves of her neck, the fine detail of the scales, the intricate contours of the head all showed through the ice frosting, like a finely carved statue. In fact, it seemed to Septimus that the dragon had turned to marble, so cold and stone-like did she look. Marcellus nodded to Septimus. "I have been explaining to Jenna that a dragon is a reptile with blood that cools but does not freeze, with blood that allows her to become deeply unconscious and yet still return to life. Indeed, some say dragon blood has the property of eternal heat. What I am saying is that it is good she is covered in ice." This made sense to Septimus, but from Jenna's expression he could see that Marcellus still had some persuading to do. "So," said Marcellus, "shall we go aboard?" "Aboard?" The thought of stepping onto the dragon boat made Jenna feel very uncomfortable. It felt disrespectful, like walking over a grave. "Naturally, it is what we need to do, or rather what you need to do." "Me?" "It is the queens who have the touch, and I believe a small bottle of revive." "Oh!" Jenna took the tiny green bottle from her pocket. On its small brown label was written, TX3 Revive. "So I can use it even without the triple bowls?" "Of course. There are many ways to use the revive." "So what do I do? Put it on her nose or something?" "Something," said Marcellus. Very carefully he stepped onto the deck of the dragon boat. and held out his hand for Jenna, who took it and stepped lightly in beside him, followed by Septimus. Almost reverentially, Marcellus moved toward the center of the deck, where there was a pair of tiny doors leading to a locked cabin. No one had ever been able to open the doors. When Janet had repaired the boat, she had become quite spooked by the fact that there was a part of it she could not get to, and there were times when she thought she could hear something in there. Marcellus kneeled down at the doors, which were mistily visible through the ice. He unwrapped his black velvet scarf and began to gently rub the ice until it was clear of hoarfrost, and peered through the glassy surface of the ice to the mysterious azure blue doors below. "Apprentice, I wonder if you have something that would melt this ice." Septimus fished a small candle end out of his pocket. "I've got my tinder box. I can light this." Marcellus heaved a sigh. "That will take hours, apprentice. Do you have, anything else?" Septimus grinned. "So much for Marcellus insisting on no magic while you're my apprentice. You mean something like a spell?" he asked. "A spell will be fine, thank you." Septimus kneeled down beside Marcellus and placed his hands on the ice that covered the doors. With his palms threatening to stick fast, he quickly muttered a simple melt. Then he leaned all his weight onto his hands and pressed hard. He felt the heat of his palms spread out into the ice, and soon there were 2 rapidly growing hand-shaped holes in the ice. Water was running down the inside of his sleeves, and his hands were through to the smooth wood below. Septimus rocked back on his heels, shook the warmth back into his freezing hands, and watched the ice retreat to reveal 2 shiny, deep blue lacquered doors, each with a simple dragon symbol enclosed in a lozenge shape. "Stop now," said Marcellus. "I think it is safer to keep the temperature low until we find out what we are dealing with." "You mean until we find out if she's dead," said Jenna. "Personally, I do not believe she is dead," said Marcellus. "Now we must open the doors." Septimus shook his head. "They don't open. In fact, I think they're false doors, just one piece of wood. That, apprentice, is what they are made to look like. But they are not. I have opened them once before." "When before?" asked Jenna. "You forget I was the husband of a keeper," Marcellus answered. He took off the heavy gold disc that hung around his neck, his alchemy key, and placed it in a shallow indentation where the doors joined, saying, "My dear Broda once had a similar panic as you, princess. I am not panicking. During a particularly cold big freeze, she too was sure that— Aha! The doors are opening!" Jenna and Septimus crouched down beside Marcellus and watched the doors swing open to reveal a deep, red-tinged darkness. Gingerly, Marcellus leaned forward and looked inside. Then he sat back on his heels and beckoned to Jenna to come closer. "Can you hear anything now?" he said in a hushed voice. Jenna leaned forward through the hatchway into the dark. A sense of being deep inside the dragon boat made the hairs on the back of her neck rise. She could smell something like warm iron. It was rich and strange and made her feel a little queasy. "Is this where her heart is?" she whispered. Marcellus nodded. "Wait a few minutes. Her heart beats slowly when it is so cold." Like surgeons gathered around a patient on an operating table, they waited for a heartbeat. Marcellus took out his timepiece and looked at the second hand moving round. It made 3 sweeps of the dial, then 4, then 5. "Nothing," Jenna said miserably. "Nothing." "No," said Marcellus heavily. "You are right, princess, of course." "She's dead," said Jenna despairingly. "She's dead." "I do not think so. If she were dead, I believe she would be frozen all the way through. But possibly she is getting near to it." Marcellus looked up at Jenna, a serious expression in his eyes. "As your mother so rightly said, only you can save her." "But how?" "It is something the queens pass down one to another." "But no one's passed it down to me." Marcellus was soothing. "I know, but I can tell you. That day in the big freeze when my Broda could no longer hear a heartbeat, she went to get my sister Esmeralda, who was queen. I came with Esmeralda because she always panicked in the queen's way, and I watched what Esmeralda did." Marcellus gave a wry smile. "And what a fuss she made about it." "About what?" asked Jenna, irritated. Sometimes she thought that Marcellus enjoyed being obscure. "I will tell you." By the time Marcellus was nearly through his explanation, Jenna had a good deal of sympathy with Esmeralda. So did Septimus. Marcellus finished with, "So now, princess, you too must enter the chamber of the heart." Jenna looked at the reddish darkness beyond the 2 little doors, and for a moment wished that she had never asked Marcellus for help. Like most castle queens and princesses, Jenna had a squeamish side to her, and right then she felt quite sick, but she must do what she must do. She took a deep breath, ducked through the low opening, and crept inside, where she found the wide, flat rib that Marcellus had described, and crawled gingerly onto it. Below her, Jenna now knew, lay the dragon boat's heart. Following Marcellus's instructions, Jenna tipped a few drops of the brilliant blue TX3 Revive onto her palms and rubbed it in. The fresh smell of peppermint cut through the thick, meaty fug of the chamber and took away her nausea. She reached down into the darkness, and her hand met something firm to the touch, cool but not ice-cold, and not, as Jenna had feared, at all slimy. It felt like touching the side of her horse, Domino, on a chilly night. This was, she knew, the dragon boat's heart. Stretching out both hands, Jenna dropped forward and leaned all her weight onto the heart for a few seconds, then released the pressure. She repeated it twice, and then sat back and waited. Nothing happened. Jenna counted to 10 slowly, and did it again. 1, 2, 3. Once more she waited, and once again nothing happened. Jenna dropped forward for a 5th time, and leaned all her weight onto the stilled heart, willing it to respond. 1, 2, 3, wait, count to 10, then ready to begin again. Just as she was reaching the end of her count to 10, Jenna became aware of something happening below in the darkness. A flutter, a twitch, and then a low, slow thrum pulsed through the chamber. Jenna was out of the doors as fast as she could go. "It worked," she whispered excitedly. "It worked! Her heart just did a beat. She's alive!" "A true queen," said Marcellus, smiling. "No one else could have done that. I suggest we wait for another beat before we close the doors, just to make sure." They waited, and waited. 2 minutes. Marcellus's whisper echoed around the cavern after what had felt like at least 10 to Jenna. 3, 4, and then at last, another thrum resonated through the dragon house. "Thank goodness," whispered Marcellus. "Now, let us quickly close the doors. It is not good to expose such delicate areas to the air." Marcellus placed his key on the doors to lock them once more. "Perhaps you could ice them over, apprentice," he said to Septimus. "An ice spell, you mean?" asked Septimus, grinning. "Whatever," said Marcellus, who, like Marcia, had now caught Septimus's slang. Thrum came another heartbeat. Septimus completed his spell, and a fresh skin of ice crept across the doors. Marcellus, Jenna, and Septimus stepped off the dragon boat and walked along the walkway toward the brightness of the snowy boatyard, where the small, anxious figure of Janet Martin waited. As they stepped down from the marble walkway, a strange sound like the rustling of autumn leaves greeted them, the sound of ghostly applause from the crowd of queens and princesses. Thrum. The ghosts parted to let them through, all passing favorable comments on Jenna's queenly abilities. Her grandmother, Queen Matilda, who had left her daughter sulking in the turret, could resist no longer. She appeared to Jenna. "Well done, my dear," she said. Jenna looked shocked. No ghost of a queen, apart from the ghastly Ethelgida, had ever spoken to her. There was, as she knew from section 133 in the Queen Rules, a ban on ghosts speaking to living princesses and queens. It was put there for a good reason, that all queens were convinced that they knew best, and would have no hesitation in telling the current incumbent so. But Queen Matilda, who had watched over her granddaughter since the day she was born, could keep silent no longer. Her granddaughter needed to know she was doing well, and Queen Matilda intended to tell her. She lightly patted Jenna's arm and smiled. "You will make a good queen," she said. "Oh," said Jenna. "Thank you." Thrum. A sudden gasp from Janet broke the moment. "My hot pot!" she yelled, and took off running across the yard, leaping over the upturned boats, heading for her hut. A cloud of black smoke was billowing from the stovepipe in the roof, and suddenly everyone could smell burning. Septimus went to help. To the background of sailors' curses and the sound of a metal pot hissing in the snow, Marcellus and Jenna looked at the dragon boat, lying white and majestic in the blue of the dragon house. Thrum. "I don't want to wall her in again," Jenna said. "I want to be able to come and talk to her, to watch over her, just like Aunt Zelda would do if she were here." "I understand, Princess," said Marcellus, "but perhaps you should seek advice from the keeper first." Jenna was not sure. "Aunt Zelda forgets stuff now," she said. "I don't know if she knows what's best anymore." Marcellus was still annoyed with Marcia, but he knew he must give as good advice to Jenna as possible. "Then ask Marcia," he said. "She will know." Septimus took a very reluctant Spitfire back to his dragon field, and arranged to meet Jenna by the great arch. Janet retreated to her hut. locked the door, and embarked upon cooking sausage and bean hot pot take 2. It was later that evening that Janet, to her utter dismay, found she had 2 dragons in the boatyard. Spitfire had returned and was sitting, perfectly quietly, at the entrance to the dragon house. Janet was not pleased, but there was something about the 2 dragons together that touched her. It was almost, she thought, as if they were mother and son.